Okay, so what then is it to harm another person? Clearly, it's not just doing something that has a negative effect on something else, because as in the case of buying a bicycle, that may have a negative effect on someone who also wants the bicycle. Okay, so it needs to be more. The basic idea is this: I'm harming someone when I'm violating a right that you have. Okay. So, for example, when Klebo wins the competition against his opponents, they might suffer from it. They might be sad, they might lose money, they are not winning, they wanted to win. But it doesn't harm them. Why not? Because they have no right to bring the prize money. They don't have a right to that money. And so therefore, by preventing them from getting the money, it doesn't harm them because they don't have a right to it. By contrast, if a person has a right, for example, you have a right to your phone, then if you take that away from you, then you harm the person, okay? So harming is connected to rights. I'm harming you when I'm violating your rights. But that just pushes the question further. What do we have rights over? Do we have rights over a song that we produced? Do we have a right to vote? Who has a right to vote? Do we have a right to paternity leave? Do we have a right to to health insurance, to good health? Do we have a right to move around whatever way we want? Do we have a right for equal opportunity, no matter our body shapes, for example, jobs, even do we have a right, like in the case of Steven Pinker, to give a talk at a university? Do we have a right to speak our minds in a public forum? So now this question, so does it harm someone? It's a question, well, does my action cause harm? Well, that question, do they have a right to these things? Okay, and that's the next question. So where would the rights come from that limit the freedom of the individuals? Now, there's different theories. One theory is the natural rights theory. According to this theory, there are certain natural rights that everyone has as a matter of basic principle. For example, those who believe in universal human rights, they think, if you think that there is a basic right to life that everyone has, a right to a decent standard of living, a right for bodily integrity, a right to develop one's basic capacities, these are basic human rights, and everyone has them. Okay? So that's one position about rights. They're basically there. One problem with this, though, is that you might ask, what exactly generates this list of rights? Is some principle behind it, or is this list of the rights you have some arbitrary collection? Okay. Now, in some statements of human rights, it's said that these rights are self-evident. So in the famous United States Declaration of Independence, it says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So in the US Declaration of Independence, it says that certain rights are self-evident. But you should doubt that this is self-evident. After all, it's not at all the case that everyone who's written about human rights agrees which ones should be on the list. So it's not that self-evident at all. So that raises the issue that this may be arbitrary. Now, the response to that is that maybe you can try to generate rights from a more basic principle. So maybe it's not arbitrary because there's some basic principle that explains these rights. One way to go here is to Kant, and those of you who have taken some X-Fill, they maybe know about the categorical imperative and things like that. That's one way to go. Another way to go, maybe you find in John Locke's idea, who thinks that we have a right of our own life in a body and everything we mix our labor with. So we have a right to our own body and also everything we do with our body. And so when we, for example, work the field and then grow crops on the field, then we also have a right to those crops. And so we have a right to property. We own those things because we have mixed our body with them through bodily labor. Now, this, you might think that's still a bit arbitrary, and it's a bit unclear what exactly it means to mix one's labor with someone, and how that is something that gives you a right to it. I mean, how is it that somehow by, touching something, that thing becomes something you also now own? It's a bit unclear. So you have a right to that. So that whole idea that there are natural rights to something, while it's sort of powerful, is also quite problematic. And one of them who's criticized it most powerfully is Bentham. So he thought, well, look, rights really are a legal institution. So it's quoted in textbook, he says, right is with me the child of law. A natural right is a son that never had a father. So he thinks that, look, you have a right to have a right to something, for example, property right, that's coming from an existing set of laws. And to speak of natural rights, it's just nonsense on stilts. I mean, it's his words. It's just nonsense to say that someone has a natural right. A right is something that requires a set of laws. But if my rights then are simply those rights that the laws of my state say that I have, my legal rights, then it seems difficult to appeal to rights to determine the limits of state authority. So here's how to see that. So the idea, again, going back to Mill, is that the state can rightfully exercise power of my action only if that action can reasonably be expected to cause harm to someone. Where harm to someone, we have understood now, is violating someone's rights. And someone's rights is whatever, now according to the conventional rights, it is whatever the state decrees as someone's legal rights. Okay. But then we get the view that the state can rightfully exercise power of my action only if that action can be reasonably expected to violate whatever the state decrees as someone's legal rights. But that's the problem. We want to use that idea of the harm principle to tell us what the state has a right to forbid and make laws about. So we can't really use legal rights to get there. So this conventional rights is really not usable for Mill. Okay, so you can go the natural rights view, conventional rights view you can't go. Mill's own view is neither the natural rights view nor the conventional view. He is a proponent of utilitarianism. So, but he uses that in an indirect way. So what he does is apply the principle of utility, that is, should maximize happiness, at the level of rules, for example, to protect individual interests. So he thinks that the special protection of particular interests, so freedom for expression, security for person, can be justified in the end by the principle of utility. So one way to think about it is that think about a lawmaker that makes laws. So this is like the conventional theory, but you sort of, it's not actual laws. So you think, which laws would a lawmaker make if they were only interested in maximizing happiness of all the citizens? And then they would make laws to protect, Mill thinks, certain basic liberties. So according to Mill, humanity would be much happier in the long run if a pretty large sphere of individual liberty is protected from state interference, and that the person has a right over. Okay. Good. So this is on what harming is. We've seen it's not actually so easy to understand what exactly is to harm someone, and the harm principle needs that.